My summary is redundant because it's been done by Hannah, Phoebe and Nadine and their colleagues. I'm just going to bring a cynical old man's view to what's been going on here. But there is a really important message that Gary slipped across to me. 2 youth reps definitely on board. I'm sure it's yet to be decided whether on board just means on the ship or on the board of trustees, but that's to be decided in due course. Addressing biodiversity loss seems, if you don't understand the words, as a small task, and indeed it was considering the wild things. And picking up on what Bryce said, it's quite clear that we are the ones that are out of control and rather wild, and the Klingons we bring with us. It has been in that spirit of exploration that we've spent the last couple of days. As always with EDS conferences, but this is a particularly good example, not only the number of people, but the great diversity, whether it's from various fields of science or sectors of society and the economy, or indeed cultures. And indeed, as we pointed out at the very beginning, that was 7 times as many people as the entire population of fairy terns. And this is the second turn that these terns have got. Actually, this is a tern that's trying a one-bird population explosion, as you can see with the 2 eggs that it's incubating. We also had 50 speakers, which were actually outnumbered by the Maui dolphins, but unfortunately they couldn't come, so we had to make do with the speakers. Actually, they were really tremendous, whether they were very local and very young or older. But I wanted to just pay a particular regard and thank you to Shari, Guy and Chris for coming from afar. We always appreciate people who do come and share their knowledge with us. And of course, Patricia at a distance via Skype and in a recording. But generating together a real groundswell across our diverse roles and networks as we try to learn and inspire and educate and persuade and act on all that we've been considering. A big thank you to everybody at EDS. I can't name everybody, it's a lot, but it's Gary, it's Fiona from a conference point of view, and Raywin and Marie and Maddie and many others. As ever, it was brilliantly organised, but as somebody up here at the podium, I was slightly disturbed today to find that EDS had prepared for every eventuality, including the death of a penguin, if this was not to work out very well as a conference. And I stood up here doing sort of virtual mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, trying to get the penguin upright again, until I realised that it was, no, it's, sorry if you, I won't explain it. Anyway, thank you to everybody at EDS for, as ever, making a terrific conference possible. And of course, fabulous learnings we've just heard about how to make such conferences even more fantastic. I can't do justice, even probably in a couple of days, to all that's gone on in the past 2 days. But it was very much about the wealth of this extraordinary abundance of nature, many of our species endemic and very long-lived and therefore particularly precious. But it's our destruction of that too, as Bill Lee pointed out, that New Zealand is undergoing exceptional biodiversity loss of this valuable global treasure. And that destruction is accelerating fast. And as Theo Stevens said, New Zealand is leading the world into the 6th great extinction. Many comments around this, but as a business journalist, one that particularly resonated with me from Weyrin was that it's not just that the Hauraki Gulf is a shadow of its former self, but actually we don't even understand what the economic value that we generate from the Hauraki Gulf is, let alone what the economic value we could generate if it was very rich and diversity. So this is very much, and I think I still see Tim Heim in there, back there, from the Hauraki Gulf Forum. So it is absolutely, of course, not just about the science, but trying to understand what economics is really about. And of course about, and this was one of Bill's quotes about from Wendell Berry, we must make our lives fit our places. So it was this extraordinary thing about the web of life and how, strand by strand we are breaking that web, and we have no real idea of the consequences of that. Or if we want to be optimistic, as we should be, it's about what extraordinary strength and resilience there would be if we helped that web of life repair itself. I thought at one point about Lear, and he has destroyed his universe, his family, and when he finally realizes this as he's on the heath and the tempest blasts across the heath with only the fool, the joker, listening to him, he says, "And thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's moulds, or Germans spill at once, that make ingrateful man," and women too. So we thought about poverty and revival, about how that healthy, resilient ecosystem can support a valuable, resilient, sustainable economy and society. Obviously, the economy is only a subset of the society. That's not order of priority. But there is still this enormously big failure of understanding about the relationship between the two. And whether it's at a really important bureaucratic level, and I think well of bureaucracy when it's done well, but sometimes it's done badly, about, as Shah reminded us, the costs of public failure is spread across a policy failure, is spread across a non-mobilized public. So mobilizing the public would help perhaps stop that happening. Economic tools, of course, are very useful, and we're learning how to use them well, but they can only possibly work if they have extremely strong value-driven strategies and deep understanding around them. And part of all that, as we've been hearing the latter part of the conference, is about engagement of various sorts, whether it's citizen scientists, citizen activists, and to take us towards things like a predator-free New Zealand. My own personal journey on this was that for a long time I thought that Paul Callaghan was kind of crazy and wrong to think that a predator-free New Zealand was even possible, let alone, I thought it'd be desirable, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. But I had this big understanding down in Whanganui in November at a conference, and it was hearing, for example, Dave Mules of Reconnecting Northland describe how people come together to do these things, that I realized that, of course, it is not just about that tally of predators, but what it does for us in terms of strengthening us as we connect that way to make this all possible, to how we imagine and then do things. I found it terrifically exciting, quite wildly exciting actually, that Marie had got us up to 4th trending on Twitter, only to be displaced by Solid Energy, but of course those two are inextricably linked because of the ecological madness of Solid Energy. It's not just an energy or economic madness, and their destruction, for example, of Happy Valley, only to then not build a coal mine that they said they were going to, is all part of this. To me, there was an extraordinarily powerful connection between those Twitter trends. But, well, it's not a but, it's an and. Again, drawing on themes that were coming through so powerfully, particularly today, about the spiritual values. And that's not, you know, we each have our own form of those spiritual values. It's not necessarily Christianity or some other of the great religions, but we express our spiritual values in many, many ways. And again, speaking personally, one of the most helpful and powerful documents of recent times is Pope Francis's papal encyclical. You don't need to be a Catholic, or let alone a Christian, or indeed have any particular religion to be able to read that and understand a little and have some inspiration about how this works, how we can bring it together. And we are starting to see that. So again, it was something I learned in Whanganui last November with the Whanganui River settlement, about how extraordinary it was that the river as itself was in that settlement, had legal standing in that settlement. And I just think it's quite magical, and I mean that perhaps in many senses of the word, development. A brief quote from somebody who wasn't here, but this is Guth Speth, who has recently retired of the head of Yale's University's School of Forestry and Environmental Sciences. He was founder of such fabulous organizations as the World Resources Institute, and he was the last but one before Helen Clark, UN Director of Development. And he said this on a BBC programme almost 2 years ago. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed and apathy, and to deal with those we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. Rest assured, we journalists don't know how to do it either, but it's a good thing to work on. And it's not just about old things, but they're old things which are universally true and everlasting. And so, for example, it seems to me incredibly important that the very first building in New Zealand to qualify under the very strict criteria of being a living building, i.e. being self-sufficient for its energy and water, is this fabulous, fabulous building that Tuhoia built in the Urueras. And this is the first living building in New Zealand. There's not many of them in the world. And look at the sheer beauty of that. This doesn't look like the first living building that went up in Seattle. That looks like a Seattle building. This is an Aotearoa building. So, some outcomes, because some good stuff has happened, in a very concrete word. It was a rather qualified or hedge commitment from the Environment Minister this morning about an NPS on Indigenous biodiversity, and I appreciate there are some hooks in what that means, but this is a real step forward, as is that clear commitment from him for a Marine Protection Act and wider ocean reforms. And obviously wouldn't be drawn on this yet, but I think there might be a fair degree of hope that we will get some terrific progress on the RMA, but with the excesses removed, hopefully. But also immensely exciting that people are, as wonderful as the RMA is, and it has yet to reach its fullest potential, to be thinking a few steps ahead as to what might come after the RMA. So indeed, Gary is very committed to, on Matarangi Maori principles and processes, that EDS is very committed to that, to help to evolve our collaborative processes in New Zealand. So there truly are collaborative processes. I don't mean this unkindly about the wonderful work that Guy Salmon did, helping us to understand the Scandinavian model of this, which informed the Land and Water Forum. But in that process, we began to develop our own collaborative processes, and we have a lot more to go on that. So there was also, I think, quite a high degree of convergence on a useful role of economic instruments, both as short-term tools, but as a long-term sort of resetting of strategy. Again, with all the important points there about being really sure we know what we're trying to do with them, and therefore making sure they're the best they can be. And however good that chart looked at DOC funding that Maggie Barry produced, we all know that that's not enough. And crucially, it's about actually not just the funding, but about restoring DOC's advocacy and advisory role too, as we've often heard. Only a few themes, only a few outcomes of the many. And so I'll just end with another little bit of New Zealand culture that I think speaks to some of the things that have been going on here over the last couple of days. It's from Alan Kerno, just a few lines from Landfall in Unknown Seas. But now there are no more islands to be found, and the eye scans risky horizons of its own in unsettled weather, and murmurs of the drowned haunt their familiar beaches. Who navigates us towards what unknown but not improbable provinces? Who reaches a future down for us from the high shelf of spiritual daring? Thank you. Go well, come back a year's time really fit, because you're going to have to keep up with younger people then, and